Hi guys, and welcome to this new episode of The Inexplicable. For centuries, the shadow of witchcraft has enveloped Europe, a grip of terror and superstition. Thousands of women and others were accused of making pacts with the devil, summoning evil spirits and holding forbidden rituals in secluded woods, away from the world. What is behind those accusations? And what if some of the most disturbing practices were inspired by ancient beliefs, forgotten rituals, and a reality more ambiguous than we imagine? In this episode, we reveal 5 shocking facts about medieval witch rituals. Truths revealed by historical documents, disturbing testimonies, and modern analysis that illuminate one of history's darkest chapters. So here are 5 shocking revelations about witch rituals in the Middle Ages. The Black Mirror Ritual. One of the most disturbing and fascinating aspects of medieval witchcraft is the use of the black mirror. It was not a simple object of vanity, nor a mere household ornament. It was a powerful ritual tool, seen by many European witches as a gateway to the afterlife, a silent portal to invisible dimensions, to places where reality twists and time loses its meaning. These mirrors were crafted with great care and precision. Some were made of obsidian, a volcanic stone of deep black color, polished until it became perfectly reflective. Others were created by blackening the bottom of plates or containers with the smoke of resins and aromatic woods, thus creating a dark, opaque surface capable of capturing the gaze and perhaps the soul. Ancient grimoires and centuries-old testimonies say the black mirror was used in nocturnal rituals, typically on moonless nights when darkness was complete and the boundary between worlds was thinner. The witches, after burning psychotropic herbs like belladonna or mandrake, would fall into a deep trance. In that altered state of consciousness, they would stare at the surface of the mirror for long minutes, waiting for visions, voices, or presences that would silently manifest from deep within the dark matter. But why did they do it? There were several objectives. Some tried to summon the spirits of the dead for advice or comfort, while others wanted to foresee catastrophic events like wars, famines, or plagues. But there was also a dark side, a more vengeful and terrifying use of the mirror. It was reportedly used to curse, summon demons, or send the evil eye to those who betrayed, mocked, or reported them to the Inquisition, of course. And what makes this practice even more unsettling is its archaic and universal nature. Objects similar to the black mirror have been found in ritual contexts much older than the Middle Ages, dating back to pre-Christian and even prehistoric civilizations. Aztec Maya priests, for example, used obsidian mirrors in divinatory rites. The Mesopotamian tradition also describes using black surfaces to interpret the gods' intentions or receive prophetic visions. All this suggests that it is a form of occult knowledge, handed down through the centuries, perhaps part of a forgotten wisdom, older than written history. And so a question naturally arises: what did they really see in those black and silent surfaces? Were they just hallucinations induced by herbs? Or did those rituals really open a door to another reality? The Book of Cursed Names. Let's imagine the room immersed in darkness, where the only source of light is the flickering flame of a candle that casts dancing shadows on the walls. Stone, the silence broken only by a constant whisper, a chant in a language forgotten for centuries. A group of women in a circle wrapped in black cloaks hold hands tightly while in the center a figure bends over a large tome. From the cover, worn by time and ash, it is the Book of Cursed Names. In medieval Europe, when fear of evil burned hotter than pyre flames, Tales spread of a dark ritual feared even by zealous inquisitors. Some of them, in the surviving records of the trials for Sargonnery, speak of a forbidden grimoire, capable of killing with a single word. According to these documents, the so-called witches didn't just cast improvised curses. They recorded names. Each name was a target, but they didn't do it with ordinary ink. The legends say they used impure substances, human blood, ash from the bones of unburied dead, mixed with animal bile or plant extracts gathered during moonless nights. Every word they wrote became a spell in itself, and every name a marked fate. The ritual took place during Sabbaths, nighttime gatherings in remote places, woods, abandoned ruins, places forbidden even to the bravest peasants, where the witches danced until exhaustion to the rhythm of infernal drums, surrounded by symbols drawn in the mud and the smoke of burning herbs. During one of these rites, a designated witch would open the book and loudly pronounce a name, just that. No complex formula or invocation, just the name sufficed. From that moment on, according to chronicles and testimonies, the descent began. The victims, unaware that their names had been spoken, fell prey to nightmares, sudden illnesses, hallucinations. Some slowly went insane, others died in terrible agony. The most disturbing part? During raids and searches of the suspected witches' homes, some inquisitors claimed to have actually found books. Black books were often hidden under floorboards or behind fireplaces. The pages were full of names. Some of these matched men of power, priests, judges, exactly the same people who had previously condemned or persecuted those who wrote them. Coincidence, suggestion, or something darker? There is no official evidence that the Book of Cursed Names ever existed in coded form. Its fascination comes from roots in real sources, documents, and beliefs handed down for centuries. One of the key historical sources mentioning this practice is the Malleus Maleficarum. Written by Heinrich Kramer and Jakob Springer, it is perhaps the most infamous manual for witch hunting. In some passages, rituals based on the use of names, written curses, and invocations spoken in secret are mentioned. The documents from the witch trials of Bamberg and Würzburg contain explicit references to lists of names written down by women accused of witchcraft who claimed to have cast targeted curses. The Sorbonne archive in Cesano di Tolosa holds historical symbols and lists that remain undeciphered. The Book of Cursed Names is more than a dark legend. It symbolizes centuries of fear, superstition, and the power of the written word. Could death really be summoned just by writing a name? Or was this just the result of a civilization scared of the unseen? Baptism, on the other hand. In the dark heart of medieval Europe, amid the fog and forests of 15th century Germany, chilling rumors spread. They weren't just legends of witches or devilish tales passed down in the villages. They were real testimonies, uneasily collected by religious and civil authorities. They spoke of an aberrant ritual whispered among the shadows with fear and disgust. Baptism, on the contrary. But be careful. It wasn't simply a blasphemous parody of the Christian sacrament. It was something much more terrifying. This rite was a real distortion of the sacred, an invocation of pure evil. Every element of the traditional baptism was corrupted. The holy water was replaced with impure liquids, stagnant water, animal or human blood, urine, and sometimes unknown secretions. The liturgical chants were replaced by blasphemies, prayers recited backwards, and obscene invocations in distorted Latin, almost as if every word had to be emptied of divine grace and filled with spiritual poison. The symbolism was clear. It is terrible to renounce God, to be reborn in sin, to willingly submit to Satan. It was more than a performance. According to the theology of the time, anyone who received this kind of baptism was irreversibly torn away from the light, excluded from salvation, consecrated to hell. It was a second birth, but into eternal darkness. And these were not just fantasies. One of the most chilling cases comes from a well-documented trial that took place in the second half of the 15th century in a village not far from Cologne. According to the records, now kept in a dusty church archive, some women were accused of kidnapping a newborn who had just been baptized in the village church. The accusations were obtained by torture. As was sadly customary, they spoke of a moonless night, of a circle drawn with ash, and of a ritual meant to erase the Christian baptism from the child. The little one, they said, had been immersed in a basin filled with putrid water, goat's blood, and urine. One of the women was reciting sacrilegious phrases, while the others chanted a funeral dirge, invoking the Lord of the Abyss to take the soul of the newborn under his true protection. The gestures, words, and timing, the month's darkest night, were all meant to upend every divine order. It was no coincidence the victim was a newborn. Baptism instead sought to corrupt purity from the start and sever the bond with God as it formed. It was a powerful symbolic gesture, a blow to Christian theology and a claim that evil rules even the innocent. Today, of course, we have no concrete evidence that this ritual was ever actually performed as described in the records. The confessions were likely forced, and the accusations likely stemmed from collective hysteria, fear, and inquisitorial propaganda. Yet the very fact that such a ritual could be conceived says a lot. Baptism, on the contrary, represented the ultimate nightmare of the medieval Christian world, the proof that hell not only existed but could creep into reality, with dark liturgies, with broken words and inverted symbols. For contemporaries, baptism, on the contrary, was the most extreme manifestation of spiritual perversion, not only because it was a challenge to God, but because it implied that the rules of the universe could be broken, that the divine laws considered eternal and unchangeable could be rewritten. On the contrary, it was proof that even the purest innocence could be corrupted, and that evil, if invoked in the right way, could answer. An idea that still continues to disturb today. The ritual of the silent heart. In the heart of the Middle Ages, when the darkness of ignorance and superstition mixed with the fear of the invisible, they observed esoteric practices so dark they seemed to come straight from a collective nightmare. Among these, one of the most unsettling was known or feared as the ritual of the mute heart, a spell that aimed to reduce its victims to silence, an absolute irreversible silence like that of the grave. Early references to this ritual appear in records and certain witchcraft trials from the 15th century, in particular in the area of France and southern Germany. The accusations claimed it was a revenge and mind control ritual, used by the so-called black witches to punish those who had dared to betray them, denounce them, or openly challenge them. The ritual began with a symbolic desecration, the removal of the heart from an animal. Usually it was a crow, a messenger from the afterlife, or a black lamb, a symbol of corrupted purity. The heart was pierced and then sewn with a silver thread, a metal considered sacred and a conductor of occult energies. Each stitch in the seam represented a knot in the victim's language, a seal on their spirit. The most disturbing part wasn't the preparation, but the application. The sewn heart was secretly buried under the bed of the individual to be targeted. From that moment on, according to the chronicles, the victim would begin to be tormented by visceral nightmares at night. Sleep became a battlefield. The visions took over reality, and then slowly the voice faded away. Not due to physical damage, but a deep, nearly incomprehensible psychological block. The loss of speech was not just a side effect, it was the very heart of the ritual. Taking away someone's ability to communicate strips away their identity, isolates them, and condemns them to a ghostly existence. In many cases, the victims became so mute and so distant from themselves that they were mistaken for being possessed or under a spell. Sources discussing this practice are fragmentary and often influenced by the sensationalist language of inquisitorial trials, but they appear fairly often in Tarn's medieval documents, especially in the rural areas of central France and Swabia. In some transcriptions of interrogations, there is explicit mention of the magic of silence, a type of spell connected to willpower, voice, and memory. According to some modern theories, these rituals might actually have been primitive forms of collective suggestion or induced hypnosis, used to psychologically control people or drive them to madness. Indirect sources that shed light on rituals of this kind can be found in texts such as the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, although there is no explicit mention of the mute heart. The treatise covers similar practices like curses on the tongue and breath. The historian Jules Michelet, in his book Le Démonisme et la Sorcellerie, mentions several French cases in which organic objects were used to magically bind a victim to eternal silence. In the same way, Russell Hope Robbins, in his Encyclopedia of Witchcraft and Demonology, mentions minor and poorly documented rituals related to the loss of voice or mute obsession, often associated with women accused of maleficium. Today, the ritual of the mute heart remains a dark legend, halfway between popular myth and the distorted truth of the centuries. But its presence across distant sources suggests that something, perhaps not as we imagine, truly frightened medieval peasants at night. A magic not only cruel but deeply symbolic, because what people truly fear is losing the chance to be heard. In short, and to conclude this overview of the dark rituals practiced by the witches of the Middle Ages, I can't help but mention the Sabbath, the ultimate demonic ritual. This ceremony, detailed in texts like the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, was seen as the ultimate proof of an alliance between humans and evil. The volume's descriptions show the Sabbath was far more than a simple nighttime gathering. It was a blasphemous parody of Christian rituals, a secret black mass with screams, wild dances, and chants. The witches were summoned in the dead of night, often in abandoned places far from prying eyes, ruins, windy hilltops, silent cemeteries, and clearings amid gnarled trees. The journey to the Sabbath, according to legend, was made on broomsticks, smeared with mysterious ointments, said to be made from human fat, hallucinogenic herbs, and menstrual blood, or by riding black animals such as goats, cats, or even by levitating on the night wind propelled by the power of the devil. Once they arrived, the ceremony would begin, and at the center of it all was the banquet. But we're not talking about a simple dinner. It was a mass, but the opposite, a perversion of the Christian sacraments. The consecrated bread was replaced by human flesh, sometimes symbolic, sometimes real in the most macabre stories. The wine turned to blood, usually from innocent victims or sacrificed animals. The foods, initially presented as sumptuous delights, turned out to be slimy, rotten, covered in mold, causing horror and disgust. Creatures that, according to Christian logic, should not have existed took part in the banquet. Talking animals like cats, toads, and snakes. They not only talked with the witches, but gave orders, suggested potions, or in some cases openly accused those present. Some stories even speak of these animals turning into real demons, with claws and glowing eyes. In some versions, they served the food. In others, they were the food, the meal. But the darkest moment was the act of submission, a sacrilegious gesture with which the witch sealed her pact with the devil. This was often described as an obscene kiss on the backside of Satan's body, precisely under the tail, in the anal area, to represent the complete renunciation of God and the acceptance of infernal power. Only after this ritual, it was said, did the witches gain their gifts, flying, casting curses, transforming into animals, or making deadly poisons. But the question that haunts us remains: did any of this really happen? Or are we facing an immense narrative construction born from the need to control, to punish, or to exorcise collective fears? I would say it's time to give the floor to the skeptics. When faced with such detailed, vivid, and almost cinematic descriptions of the magical practices attributed to medieval witches, it's inevitable to ask questions. Were these stories just products of rural superstition, collective fear, and ignorance? Or, and this is the more unsettling hypothesis, was there really a fragment of truth buried beneath centuries of condemnations, burnings, and trials? Let's remember, most of the testimonies about witchcraft have come down to us through the distorted lens of the Inquisition. Among confessions extracted by violence, delirium induced by torture, or statements obtained under threat of death. Broken hands, branded bodies, tongues cut out, confessions written in blood and pain. In such a context, how reliable can we really consider these accounts? Still, it makes you think. In places and times that are very far apart, some descriptions are repeated with uncanny precision. Night flights, anointing with mysterious ointments, ritual feasts, songs in forgotten languages, wild dances in the moonlight. From late medieval Germany to the countryside of France, from Spanish documents of the Inquisition period to the Salem trials. In the New World, certain symbols reappear as if they were a collective memory that refuses to disappear. This raises a question: what if something much older lies behind that complex iconography? A pre-Christian cult survived in the shadows, perhaps linked to the mother goddess, to fertility, to the cycles of nature. Knowledge secretly handed down through generations by women beyond the control of patriarchal society. Perhaps the Sabbath, that much demonized nocturnal gathering, was not a worship of evil, but a moment of extreme freedom, of communion. Maybe the witches were simply healers, midwives, and herbalists who understood the moon, plants, and the human body. In a time when only the church and elite held knowledge, these women were seen as dangerous, independent, and rebellious, and so had to be eliminated. So what we call witchcraft today might actually have been a collection of folk traditions, archaic spiritualities, and therapeutic practices that were demonized to justify persecutions and executions. And now the floor is yours. What are your thoughts on these ancient rituals? They were just the result of superstition, folk legends that were accepted as reality during the witch trials. Or perhaps the echo of an ancient knowledge never truly forgotten. Let me know in a comment. Inspiegabil podcast is an original format by Luca Perella with sound design by Matteo Alessandro. If you like this episode, subscribe on YouTube or share it with friends. Greetings, and see you at the next appointment with the unexplainable.